It's a little bit after 5, and today is Wednesday, the last day of September. It's in between the Jewish festivals of Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and today our topic is going to be preparing for Sukkot. We're going to look at the material that's in chapter 23 of Leviticus and going from about verse 33 to verse 44 in the text. This is the basic description of what the holiday is all about. And I'm sitting here in my sukkah, which is up, and the lights are up, and some of the gourds are up, and the decorations are not. And the actually, I used to call them Menorot Shel Yom Ha'atzmaut lights. But they work in the sukkah as well as in other places. So they're on the floor. I fixed them all. I fixed most of them. Some of them I can't get. So I have little grapes with lights in them, and I have grapes without lights in them, and I have all sorts of things we've used to decorate for years and years and years. Okay, I'm going to share the screen, and we'll look at our text. So, can you see the text?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Is it big enough to read?
If you could make it another 10-15% bigger, that would be good for my eyes. I don't know about anybody else. All the young people here probably would have no problems with it. There we go. Oh my gosh.
Now, I can't see it.
Okay. There you go. Is that a good halfway point?
Okay, let me just check something. Okay. Okay, are we back to being able to see it?
Yep. At least I am.
Okay, Bridget, I'm going to ask you to be our reader for now. Do you think you can handle that?
I think I can. The Lord, you want me to get started?
Please.
The Lord spoke to Moses saying,
1 minute, please.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
The Lord spoke to Moses saying, say to the Israelite people, on the 15th day of this 7th month, there shall be the feast of booths to the Lord, to last 7 days. The first shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupation. 7 days you shall bring offerings by the fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall observe a sacred occasion and bring an offering by the fire to the Lord. It is a solemn gathering. You shall not work at your occupations. Those are the set times of the Lord, that you shall celebrate as sacred occasions, bringing offerings by the fire to the Lord, burnt offerings, meal offerings, sacrifices, libations. On each day, what is proper to it, apart from the Sabbaths of the Lord, and apart from your gifts, and from all your votive offerings, and from all your free will offerings that you will give to the Lord.
Okay, Bridget, up to here. What do you make of this?
Well, they're commanding that they need to give things to the Lord for 7 days, and that they shall not work, and that this is a sacred occasion.
Well, that sounds pretty good. Okay, what kinds of things do they want to give?
Burnt offerings, meal offerings, sacrifices, libations.
Okay, do you know what any of those things are?
I do.
Okay, so enlighten us.
Well, a meal offering is, or a sacrifice is they ritually kill something. Libations would be alcohol. Meal offerings would be, wouldn't they throw the meal into the fire?
Okay.
And isn't that the same thing with burnt offerings? They throw the best part of the animal into the fire?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Get her a chair, please. Okay, well, so there it is. And Neil would say this is very familiar because we read it, and it's a Torah reading that he probably read in conservative synagogues from time to time. Okay, it actually comes at the end of a very long passage, which is one of the more famous lists of all the festivals of the Jewish festival year. It begins with the Passover offering, which is before the festival of Passover. It's the afternoon before these days is the Seder. Then there's the Feast of Matzah, and then there is the counting of the Omer beginning, the way we Jews understand it. Then there is Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, and then there is the Day of Trumpets. Today we call that Rosh Hashanah. Then there is a Day of Atonement, Yom HaKippurim. Then they have this festival, the 15th day of the 7th month, the Feast of Booths, 7 days, the first day. And then, although it says the 7 days, there's an 8th day you shall observe a sacred occasion. And the rabbis are going to ask, what's that all about? And then it ends. These are the set times of the Lord finished, with all the burnt offerings and whatnot. What's interesting is that it then begins again, and this is really the only place where scriptures gives more details other than just mentioning the Feast of Booths. Bridget, why don't you go on with your reading? You're doing a great job.
Okay. Mark, on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival of the Lord, to last 7 days. A complete rest on the first day, and a complete rest on the 8th day. On the first day you shall take a product of hadar trees, branches of palm leaves, burrs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival of the Lord for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time throughout the ages. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I, the Lord your God. So Moses declared to the Israelites the set times of the Lord.
Okay, so anybody want to help Bridget out? She's doing a great job, but maybe someone will help. What are some of the things that we read in this passage?
7 days.
7 days, and what do you do for 7 days?
Well, the first two you celebrate, and of course you have to bring the luav and the articles,
Yeah, so it actually doesn't say, it says branches of palm trees and boughs of leafy trees, and we're not sure what those things are. Product of hadar trees, we're not sure what that is either. Palm trees we probably are. And then the willows of the brook, we're pretty sure we know what those things are. And our commentators are going to ask, what are these things? And what does it mean to take them? What does that mean? And it says on the first day, what about all the other days? We don't actually take today we take the lulav and etrog for 7 days, but the Bible says only one. What does that mean? And so the Jewish tradition is going to ask all of those questions. And then the second thing that it talks about is it's 7 days as a festival. And then in the 7th month, there's a law for all time to live in booths for 7 days. It has all citizens. The Hebrew word is ezrach, and they're going to ask, well, what does that mean? In order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths. Problem is that there's no reference to living in booths anywhere else other than here. Now we'll look at Rashi because that's what we typically do in this program. This is from the Chabad website. So does anybody want to volunteer to read for, actually, I'll ask you all to read for yourself a holy occasion. Read for it slowly. It's a little bit complicated, and to yourselves, and then we'll talk about what it means.
Mention is connected with Yom Kippur to sanctify the day, wearing clean garments, while the expression of the holy days means sanctified with food and drink. So wearing clean clothes and food. I thought those were.
So the editor of the Chabad text has made the following conclusion. The comment is, what is Mikra Kodesh, a holy occasion? What makes it holy? Normally, how do we sanctify the Sabbath? This is the Jews call this a klutz kasha. Because if I were to say this in sort of Yiddishized or Hebrew or sort of Yiddishized English, how do we make Kiddush on Shabbos?
We say it, we have prayers that we say, and
Yeah,
we bless the food and the wine.
yeah, so we actually bless the creator of the food and the wine. And so what's Rashi's problem? Well, Rashi's problem is that on Yom Kippur, we do it with wearing fresh clothing and with prayer. But he says on the other days, that's when you have ma'achal u'mishteh. That's when you have eating and drinking and clean clothing and prayer. So the editor said this probably belongs elsewhere. Yom Kippur is very unusual in that it is sanctified only by wearing fresh clothes and praying. It's not sanctified by making kiddush and having wine or having a little, I don't know what they do in Dothan, Alabama, whether they have a little bit of, bourbon. I guess it's the South instead of listening to the rabbi talk. But, some synagogues would do that too. Okay, let's go on to the next comment by Rashi. In Chabad, typically it's vodka, not bourbon. Okay, it's a day of detention. And this is not what you do after school, but this is the 8th day. And the rabbis say that the Sukkot is really only 7 days, but we have an 8th day. Outside of Israel, there's a 9th day. And that's just like God saying, hang out for another day with me. I'm not going to really talk about these things even in great detail, except for this one. One of the things the rabbi said is, can you really take off work for 8 days in a row? One might think that even during the intermediate days of the festival, work of labor is prohibited. Scripture says it is a day of detention only on the 8th day. And again, this is Yom Atzeret. Atzeret in modern Hebrew, La'atzor means to arrest, among other things. And then the editor gives you the rule. On the middle days of a festival, work that normally would not be done by religious Jews is allowed, especially if postponing it would create some sort of a loss, a monetary loss, or prevent you from reaching goals or whatever it is. So some Jewish schools don't want them to do homework on the intermediate days. I would argue that homework, you'll lose your education that way. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the requirements of the days and one of the nitpicking things, but here we go. On the 15th day, when you gather in the produce of the land, anything you want to say about these two Rashi comments?
Peace offerings.
Okay, Passover and Shavuot are the other 2 festivals.
Can I point out that the harvest is very different at this time of year than the harvest was in at the end of the winter growing season. Passover starts the barley harvest, and Shavuot, 50 days later, ends the wheat harvest, whereas here it's the high value crops. It's olive, which gets turned into oil, which is worth a lot of money. It's grapes, which get turned into wine, which is always in most societies a pretty expensive product, and it's dates, which get turned into a mash, a mousse that they call honey, but which really functionally was a type of sweetener that was oil. And so those 3 are harvested at this time of year at least in the ancient land of Israel. I'm assuming that some of those are still harvested now at this time of year. And I've been telling my congregations, certainly for all the years where I've been a kolbo, the whole clergy, that one reason we read the most depressing book in the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes, is because we wanted to make sure that people didn't have parties and get drunk with all that brand new wine that was just being made from the fresh grape harvest, the way the Romans and the Greeks did. And by reading Ecclesiastes, it kind of dampened the mood from getting out of hand.
Well, that I had not thought to make that connection, but why not? It's actually pretty good. Okay, When you gather in the produce of the land is another reminder that even though the traditional commentators all assumed that the biblical calendar was lunar, they all assumed that it was corrected to keep pace with the sun. What's interesting is that we in the Jewish community have no recollection of doing what this particular Rashi suggests. And the Rashi comes from Torat Kohanim, which is an ancient commentary. But in Mesopotamia, apparently they did this. They'd work out the calendar, and once every 19 years, instead of adding the extra month in the spring, right before Passover, so that the spring equinox was at the right time, it worked out that it made more, the spring equinox would be at the right time, but the fall equinox would not be. So they added the extra month right before what the month that we would call Tishrei, they would call Tishrei. But I don't know that there was any, I don't know that Torat Kohanim is actually remembering that at all. If you do the math, the time from Passover to Sukkot is 6 lunar months of 29 and a half days. So it's a little bit less than half a year. So that's why they had that thing over there. Okay, we're going to skip ahead. Here are what those things are. The fruit of the Hadar tree. And Rashi asks, why is it called Eitz Hadar? It says, Eitz Shatam Eitzo Upiryo Shaveh. I have no idea what this means. It says if you bite into the tree, it tastes the same thing as the fruit. But that's what it says. Neil, do you have any idea what it means?
No, that's weird.
Yeah. The best thing that I can do is that it's possible they made a spice from the bark, and that the spice from the bark had something of the same flavor as the citron itself. We assume that the etrog is a citron. Notice that they quote Ramban. This is Nachmanides, who died in 1270. I don't think that he was the first one to assume that the Pre-Eitz Hadar was an etrog. And in fact, here they quote from SUKKAH, from 35a, page 35a in the Talmudic tractate of SUKKAH, that it's already known as an etrog, a particular fruit. And then kapot tamarim, and they argue why is it that it's written with or without a vav, and this is used to determine that we only take one lulav. And then anaf eitz avot, they say anaf, that means they have to be braided, so they learn this is a myrtle. And we're going to go on very quickly and look at this. Why the resident, the ezrach, the citizen? And that signifies a native Jew, according to Rashi. And among the Israelites comes to include converts in this commandment. I've actually heard a rabbinical interpretation saying that the Ha'ezrach b'Yisrael is used to indicate that anybody who wants to take the lulav and the etrog, Jew or not Jew, man, woman, whatever, can. They're not all required to, but they can take the lulav and etrog. This may be more relevant, for example, in Neil's congregation, where you may not know whether the people in the synagogue are Jewish or not Jewish, and give them the lulav and etrog anyway. I don't know, is this something, do they even have a lulav and etrog in Alabama?
We've been buying at least
okay.
two every single year, and the only thing that changed when I came to town is I said I want to buy it from the guy who always gives me amazing ones for the price. So they were okay with switching to my supplier, but he's been supplying, let's see, this is my 7th congregation. I think 5 out of the 7 were very glad to switch their business to him on my say-so.
So one could argue from this verse that in the synagogue, if there are not enough, if people want to take the lulav and etrog who are not Jewish, you might not want to do it. But as I said, I've heard people argue that you don't ask, and if you do it from this language.
Yeah, sure.
And here's the explanation of the sukkah. It never talks about a sukkah, a booth, but it does talk about the clouds of glory that surrounded the Israelites. So Rashi and many other Jewish interpreters think that when it says the children of Israel lived in booths, these were the clouds of glory. So that this sukkah that I'm in right now is not merely recollecting some booth that you might have put up out in your vineyard or way out in the desert where your date palms were growing so that you could stay overnight easily. But this actually reenacts the temple covered with the clouds of glory. And I actually think that's interesting here. This is for Zainab. The covering is temporary. It's not made out of cloth like the Kaaba, but it's something that's made to be taken down and put on easily. And I certainly have seen people who've interpreted the fact that it's built, the structure can be permanent, but the roof has to be something that you can put on and take off temporarily. And drawing the connection with the Kaaba in Mecca and some other desert, I'll call them sanctuaries, that were found in various parts in northwestern Arabia. Okay, this is the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud. Again, I don't know whether any of the congregations that Cantor Schwartz worked at knew why they have the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, but this was one of my jokes. The Jerusalem Talmud is J, and the Babylonian is B. And in many congregations, there are people who study J and B while the rabbi is speaking. And Neil is sort of wondering about J and B is Scotch.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's going on? And the passages are nearly exactly the same. The Yerushalmi and the Bavli, as they're called, the Jerusalem and the Babylonian, have more or less the same thing. So what are they saying here? Well, the Jerusalem Talmud begins with a question. It says you'll sit in the sukkah for 7 days. So you say days, maybe what about the nights? So it says, just as over here it says days and nights, and over there it says days and nights. So you have to sit in the nighttime as well as the daytime. People who are familiar with the Passover service know that in the Seder we have the same kind of an argument. Why do we tell the Seder at night? Because it talks about, remember the day you went out of Egypt. You should only talk about it during the daytime. And then the second part is exactly the same, although a different rabbi is quoted. The language used to describe the 15th day Sukkot and Passover both refer to the 15th day. And the rabbis decided that it is required to eat a matzah on the first day, and it's required to sit in the sukkah on the first night of Passover, and after that, the requirement is not the same. On the other hand, even though we rule the first night there's an obligation to eat the sukkah, and from that point onward it is optional, I'm going to ask Simcha whether the Chabad have any different practice. On the first night of Passover, do we say, Asher Kedishanu Mitzvotav V'tzivanu Ala Achilat Matzah? And do we say that bracha on the third or fourth night if we eat matzah?
No, we're just saying it. We just say it first and second Seder. That's it.
That's right. But how about Asher Kedishanu, who's commanded us to sit in the sukkah? Do we say that the first night only?
As long as you have mazonos or you have bread to eat, we'll say it. If you don't have it, our custom is not to say it. So if I go get a glass of water and sit in the sukkah, I say the blessing over the water, but I don't say the B'Shev Sukkah. I don't say that. So
right. So all I'm pointing out is that the parallel that's made by both Talmuds and in many, 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 many sermons does not hold water with it when it comes to the blessing.
But I think what the reason for the difference, though, Seth, is the following: is that because I don't take my word on this, but this is just what I believe is going on from what I've been understanding over the years, is because since we're not actually living in the sukkah, that's why we say the blessing during the week and we make sure that we have it in there. So we're actually, that's how we live in the sukkah during the week by making that blessing. Because every time we say that, it's as if we're recreating the first time that we're in the sukkah, because we don't sleep in the sukkah. It's not the Chabad custom to sleep in the sukkah, and it's not the Chabad custom as a rule to spend, all your time there during the day. So, I mean, most people just, if they're really holding to it, they will not eat anywhere and drink anything but in the sukkah, and make sure that they can only say the blessing. So.
Okay, well, again, it is something that needs an explanation, and I just wanted to point out what I think is at least potentially a curious fact. Okay, so here is another analogy. On the 15th day of the 7th month is the festival of Sukkot, and Passover says the 15th of Passover. Again, this is called Gezerah Shama in rabbinic language. You have the same word repeated, and the rabbis allow, at least in certain circumstances, to say, well, you have the same word. Can we learn something from the fact that the word is repeated? So women have to eat matzah on the first night of Passover, but women don't have to sit in the sukkah in the first night of Passover. So, and this is the reason which they do it. And they said why they have that ha'ezrach b'Yisrael, the citizen in Israel, whatever that means, the extra word means that normally women would not be required to do things that are specifically related to the festival that are time considered. You have to do it on the evening of the 15th day of Nisan. And traditional Judaism exempts women from doing that. I'm going to go on because I want to finish all the sources I put together for you. This is Targum Jonathan, and I call it pseudo-Jonathan because that's what typically academics do. Jonathan is the Targum, is the translation into Aramaic for the prophets, and it's called TY, but it probably is Targum Yerushalayim, although we use that for a fragmentary translation. The Targum here adds all the rabbinic details for how a sukkah needs to be made. The sukkah needs to have two sides. They need to be a handbreadth higher. A shaded part must be greater than that into which the sunshine comes. So again, you need to have a covering. It needs to have more shade than sun. It can be made for the feast. It has to be made for the festival itself. It has to be made from different kinds of materials which spring from the earth and are uprooted. So you can make sukkahs from wood and from bamboo and from anything that grows from the earth. And the sides, actually, it doesn't matter. The sides can be made from metal. But the top is bamboo or wood or branches or whatever, and they have to be cut. And you shall sit in it for 7 days. I'm not going to go into too great detail. I just want to point out that the Targum puts it right into the text. And then this very curious thing, it requires the males in Israel and the children who do not need their mothers, which I think is very strange. I hadn't had a chance to figure out what this is, but here is it.
They don't need to be nursed. They don't need to be nursed.
I know what it means, but it means that not only do men have to sit in the sukkah, but children, presumably male children, who are above nursing age, have to sit in the sukkah. Usually, if you are not yet 13, you don't have to worry about this in quite the same way. That's what I'm saying. This I think it's a little bit strange. But here it says in the Aramaic, Kol dechuraya, all of the Israelites, v'afilu ze'irei delat tzrichin le'imahon, and again, this is presumably young men, young boys, who are no longer nursing. Unlike what is usually the case, that children get exempted. At least this particular text says the children have to be in it. Live in the sukkah. Ibn Ezra lived in Spain and worked outside Spain in parts of Europe after he left Spain in the 1140s when it was invaded by the Almohades. Ibn Ezra, on one of the verses, talks about what the Karaites did. In one of my classes, I actually mentioned the Karaites, and here he says that the Karaites, he calls them the Tzdukim, the Sadducees, said the sukkah must be built from the four species, and they bring a book from Sefer Ezra, that's what he calls it. Heviu Ra'aya mi Sefer Ezra. In fact, we call this Nehemiah. The rabbis, Jewish tradition thinks of Ezra and Nehemiah as one book. When the Jews count 24 books, they count Ezra and Nehemiah as one. And I'm not going to go pick up the reference there, but there they refer to the Judeans returning to the land of Israel after the Babylonian exile and observing the Feast of Booths, and it looks like they're building the Sukkah from the four species. But Ezra says no, and he calls them nitwits. Halfwits. Here is the Hebrew. Where is it? I just saw it before. Yeah, Ela Ure Lev. People whose hearts are completely, whose minds are broken. Okay, and then finally something from the Zohar. This is not the passage that generates the Ushpizin, I think, but it did come up in Sefaria, and I'll translate it to the best of my ability. Simcha or Neil, are you Zohar experts?
I am not, and I actually am not real keen on too much mysticism, so that's another reason.
Well, I am not either, but here's what it says. So the Zohar is commenting on this. De'ihi Tishrei, that's the month of Tishrei. Mikra Kodesh Yelachem Kol Melechet Avodah Lo Ta'asu V'Chagotem Oto Chag Lashem Shivat Yamim V'Gomer. Part of this is for Simcha's benefit. I don't know whether it will all be familiar. V'Chamisha Asar Misitra de Yod Aleph. So the 15th, well, that's like the Hebrew name Yod Aleph, one of the divine names. The numerical value is Simcha. Yod Hey?
I'm sorry. What are you asking? This one right here?
Yeah. So.
Solid Yod Hey?
Yeah. Well, it's Sitra De. Yeah, and then after that is Yod Hey.
Yod Hey is 10 and 15.
Yeah, so that's 15, and that's a divine name, and that fits someplace in the Zoharic idea. V'chagotem oto da ot vav. So the oto, he understands that as vav, which is 6, but that's not how he's going to understand that. That's amuda de emtsaita. That is the central column. That's the column that goes from Keter all the way down to Malchut in the Sephirotic tree. And then Chag, what's left, Chag is Chesed Gevurah, which Simcha, you should understand. What is Chesed Gevurah?
Yeah, it's kindness and severity. Shiva Himim for 7 days. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's giving you the Kabbalistic Sefirot.
Because it's joining those two. By the middle is the joining of those two together to produce less severity. It's not total kindness, but the kindness and severity are combined in the middle column there.
Right. So we were talking about the 15th day of the month,
right?
And suddenly we have in the Zohar this very interesting mystic idea that connects the 15th with a way of looking and Chagotem Oto with the fact that you'll have a Chag and that you'll have the Vav, the central thing, and you'll connect somehow Chesed, loving kindness, and Gevurah, which is greatness. And then it's Misitra Devat Sheva from the side that is 7, and that is Malchut. That is the lowest of the 10 Sefirot. Then he's going to count.
Right.
Avahan, These are the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Raya Mehem Nahir has to mean Moses, the faithful shepherd.
Birds. And Aaron, David, and Shlomo.
And then Aaron, David, and Shlomo. Aaron, David, and Solomon. And in the Ushpizin, in the invitation, we actually include Joseph and not Solomon. We include Solomon when we have a blessing for health. Ha'inon Sheba, these are 7. Over against 7 Sefirot.
Can I show a little picture that I quickly drew of the Sefirot?
Yes, please.
Who are not so familiar with it.
Right.
They all connect with each other.
Yeah, and that's very nice. And I don't do that much either, but I'm going to mention that I'm teaching a course in Jewish mysticism, so I at least have to be aware of this stuff from time to time. And so we hope to make for you a sukkah. Dihi ima elah, and the sukkah is understood as the highest mother, which is Bina. L'sakkaha alayhu, who covers over them like a mother watches over her children. And so as we enter the festival of Sukkot, we hope that all of our preparations, whether there's a lulav and the etrog, I also count 7 for the lulav and etrog. You have a lulav, you have an etrog, you have 3 of one and 2 of the other. And let's see, 2, 3, 1, 1, that makes 7. So you have 7 species for the lulav and etrog. And there is my mysticism for the day.
These are also, wait, hold on one second. Those are also the 7 guests that come each night, one at a time, into the sukkah in that order. That is there. In addition to, well, at least on the Hasidic side, we believe that the Rebbeim, Baal Shem Tov, and the other Rebbeim come as well every night, along with each one of these guests that were listed here. So
let's not forget the women too in modern liberal Judaism.
Well, the women can go to somewhere else in Chabad, but they don't come to our sukkah.
I understand, but are inviting.
That's our tradition. That's our minhag. Or whatever you want to call it. In Alabama, they can go.
No, all over the country I've been. The argument is.
I heard that today. I went,
Okay, wait.
So the real question is,
I'm not going to get into a discussion of that.
So who are the other 3? Everybody agrees it's Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, but then there's about 10 other women who get chosen to be the other 3. Is it Miriam? Is it Ruth? Is it Deborah? Is it Esther? Etc., etc. That's much more of a regional differentiation among different parts of the country than even, pretty much all the liberal groups, all the non-Orthodox groups agree that there are women Ushpizin guests, but the argument is who are the other 3 after you get the 4 matriarchs.
We don't argue. We don't argue about it.
No,
this is something that I'm going to jut in and suggest that this is something that shows that the liberal branches of Judaism really have no idea who these guests are. These guests are not Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joseph, and David, which is what the text says. These texts are Chesed and Gevura and Tiferet and Netzach and Hod and Yesod and Malchut in that order for very good reasons. And so the deciding thing should really be to what matriarch do you assign which of the Sefirot? And this is a very difficult business because I don't know that any of the women, well, let's put it this way, in classic Kabbalah, these are not the women Sefirot. And it would be a hard thing to do.
But you know the Sefirot well enough to know that there's masculine Sefirot and feminine Sefirot.
Absolutely. And Bina, for example, would be Sarah, maybe. And, whatever it is. But
right, so can I give you a heads up if you're going to be teaching about Sefirot that I had the wonderful pleasure the last time Cage met in person as opposed to the entire month of July online like it did this year. I studied with one session with Judy Kaplan Ginsburg, who is a name you probably recognize as a
Okay.
composer, singer, and she absolutely delighted me because, having been a religion major, I studied the chakras of Hinduism in both
Okay.
undergraduate and graduate levels. And she started going on and on about the comparison between the places in the human body that represented the Sphirot and the corresponding places among the chakras. And she absolutely nailed it. They are a one-to-one correspondence between the chakras and the Sphirot when we talk about comparing them to the different parts of the human body.
So, for the people who are uninitiated in Kabbalah or not really too interested in it, we have been talking a little. I thought it would be appropriate to end with a kind of idea that just as in the Sukkah we are covered out in the open somehow or other, and there's all this symbolism, so too should the symbolism of the Sukkah cover us and protect us for a year that we hope will be better than the last half of the year that in Jewish tradition just ended. You know, some nice kind of a word. At some point in Jewish tradition, there was a notion that there were Sifirot, and there is no way to translate it. People just call them that usually. The first appearance of the term in Jewish tradition is in the Book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah, and there are 10 of them. 9, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, whatever that mean, and they are associated with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they are associated with air, water, no, it's earth. I'm going to get this wrong because I think air is not, I think water is not, because water is primordial. And Simcha's probably looking this up, he knows this by heart. But one of them is kind of primordial spirit, then there is air, fire, and earth, and then there is up, down, left, right, forward, back, although not necessarily in that order. And we don't know very much more about them. In the 11th and 10th century, we begin to hear a lot more about these things in a far more complicated discourse. In the 13th century, a book called the Zohar appears, and what I read was from the Zohar. The Zohar could be translated radiance or brilliance. Zah is probably a familiar term. And the Zohar is traditionally ascribed to Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai, Shimon Bar Yochai, except that even if he did write it, no one knew about it until the 13th century. And in the 13th century, actually a little bit before, there's an awful lot of speculation that emerges about those things. And everything gets pushed into that. The ancient patriarchs, the 7 rebbes of the Lubavitcher movement. I'm sure that each one has his own association with the Sphira. Reb Menachem Mendel, which Sphira is he associated with? I don't know. So
we don't match them up that way.
You don't do it that way.
We don't match them up that way, no.
Okay, but there is a tradition of associating the ancient patriarchs and having all sorts of interesting ideas. Yes. And I don't want to spend any more time about it. Instead, first of all, Lori and Rivka, I think I saw Jessica briefly. You'll send my regards and wishes for a Happy New Year. Okay, and Zainab had to leave. I was going to wish her something, but there you go. Does anybody have any? Oh, there you are. Someone else left. Anybody have questions or comments? Donna?
I have a question. Last year, they wanted me to invite a family member to the Sukkah, a departed family member. Where did that come from?
Well, that's the whole thing. And, you know, Cantor Neil said he doesn't have that much patience with this type of thing. And I really don't either. It's a lot of fun, but I think that the symbolism is important. And if what the request to invite a departed family member means that for 7 nights you remember departed family members and you feel that you have some sort of connection with them, unless you take this too seriously, if you take this as a seance, that may be a little bit much. But if you say today we're going to invite, as it were, the spirit of my Aunt Carmela or whatever, and talk about her, remembering them is not a bad thing. The Jewish tradition ends this festival with Yizkor, a time in which we remember those who are no longer among us. Inviting people who we knew who are no longer among us is not a bad idea. It's like the 7 matriarchs that Cantor Schwartz talked about, or like whatever. HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, whatever you might think of their politics, they have sukkah decorations which talk about 7 immigrants and 7 people from various. Well, I mean, why not?
Cool.
And I've seen other variations on the theme to hang up in a sukkah.
Is this something like the Day of the Dead?
Well, I'm saying, if you make it too much like the Day of the Dead, I think you're overdoing it. Simcha is smiling.
Wait, can I throw something in here? We have to be very, very careful because some of the Eastern religions kind of deify the ancestors, and that's something that makes Judaism, and always has made Judaism, very uchi, very uncomfortable.
Right. Although Judaism may have done it at one point, ancient Israelites who were not very good Jews, according to the prophets,
right,
may have done that. And some scholars think that even in the 10 Commandments, honor your mother and father might even have been a survival of that idea. My teacher back at Yale, Marvin Pope, thought that the Song of Songs was similar to some of the poems that were recited in cemeteries by neighbors of the Israelites in order to honor the spirits of the dead and talk about ki azah ava mimavet, because love is stronger than death. And again, Marvin had many crazy ideas, and this may very well have been one of them. But I will underscore what Neil said, to be very careful about overdoing the presence, the literal meaning of the presence of the dead. Inviting the person symbolically and spending time recalling them, that's a great idea. Right. Memory is important.
May I ask permission to publicly ask you a question that I want to make sure that I haven't spent an entire career as steering my congregants wrong? A grammar question.
Okay.
All right. I have been saying that to solve issues of the fact that there seem to never be enough chairs, no matter how big the sukkah, no matter how many chairs are put out there, never seem to be enough chairs that people can easily get into at the end of the bracha leishei basukkah. And I have worked with rabbis, and now that I've been functioning as if I was a rabbi, the official word has been that leishev does not mean literally to sit, it means literally to dwell, that you are fulfilling the blessing simply by being inside the walls of the sukkah under the SUKKAH. You are, I will publicly give you the credit for being a much better grammarian than I am, and I would like a ruling from you, my friend and my teacher.
Okay, so you actually asked a halachic question rather than a grammar question. The halachic question I am not going to resolve except to say that, first of all, if you sit in the sukkah, you certainly have fulfilled it, even if you get up and walk out. Right. Secondly, in my humble opinion, if you walk into a sukkah and you eat something, if you're not able to sit in the sukkah, there might be all sorts of reasons why that is. And Simcha may say, yeah, you need to have at least a seat, one seat so somebody can sit. But actually, if
it's tricky because when you look in the Gemara and you see what the Rambam says, I mean, there's instances where people have got most of their body in and their head out, and versus their head in and their body out, and which counts which way and so forth. So, the main thing is that you're in the sukkah.
Right.
That's how we would
So,
respond.
yeah, so
If
the main,
you look up at the sock and you say the blessing, you know, if that, I mean, as I like to tell people all the time, if when, God forbid, it's your time and you go up there, the worst they have on you is you didn't sit when you said the blessing in the sukkah, that one sukkah.
But
You got me.
what I'm okay. But
now I'm going to answer, Neil, now I'll answer the grammatical question, or the question that was what you said. So, lashevet means to sit down. It also means to continue sitting.
Yeah.
It also means to dwell. Shevet achim gam yachad does not mean people sit on each other.
Right. We sit.
So, Shevet achim gam yachad means dwelling together. So, the grammatical question is 100%. Leshev basukkah means to dwell in the sukkah.
okay, good. All right, I haven't been.
And as Simcha said,
You're
point
fine.
of fact, the way you should be fulfilling the mitzvah is not by sitting in the sukkah.
Oh, that's interesting.
You should be fulfilling it by living in the sukkah, by dwelling in the sukkah.
Now there, geography matters, because I have a picture of my sukkah that I built in Canada, covered by snow. And even
Yeah, Rambam says you push the snow off,
It's the snow off.
It's not willing to sleep outside once.
and you can sleep. He said rain is a problem because the rain will come through snow. You can push it
Oh,
off.
you can push off. Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a Rambam, and Rambam lived in Cairo where it was not likely to be that cold.
No, they just had sandstorms. Mm-hmm.
Even if it was the Mechaber, even if it was the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, Zainab, have you been mystified by all of this, or is this fun? Are you learning stuff?
I'm learning stuff. I'm good.
I don't know that I have very much to offer. I actually have a lecture in which I compare Sukkah, the festival, to the Hajj, because here is the building, and the building is a square building with a temporary roof, and you know the Hajj has a temporary roof. The Kiswa is temporary. And one of the ways in which the festival is observed is not mentioned in the biblical texts. But, Simcha, what do people do with the lulav and etrog in a synagogue? After they wave it, what else do they do? This is not hard. Hoshana, Lamancha, what do they do?
Oh, you're talking about procession.
Yeah, and they walk around how many times?
7, just like the...
Yeah, so they walk around one time for 6 days, but then on the 7th day they walk around 7 times. And then on the 8th day, they walk around with the Torah 7 times and then another 7 times. And you add it up, it's a lot of walking around in circles. Almost every congregation has the left shoulder facing the center, which is also like what's done in the Kaaba.
Yeah.
So there's that combination, that thing which is similar. On the other hand, there's no lulav and etrog in Islam. So there it is. However, the Kaaba is a place with water. There's a place where there was a spout in the roof, and there's also Zamzam. And my feeling is that all of these trees, the willow tree grows basically in or on the banks of water, and the palm grows in the desert, and the etrog needs to be irrigated in certain ways. And the myrtle grows as a bush, but only in certain types of climates. So we have different types of water environments. So you could also say it's a connection with water. I'm going to blank on her name. She left and it's not up here. Bridget. Bridget talked about the libation as being alcohol, but Sukkot is the time when the libation was water also. They had the water libation, the Sukkah, because it was also connected with the idea of water. And
Beta Shoeva.
Yeah, and the Simchat Beta Shoeva was also with water. So there's an awful lot of connections that one could have to do the comparative religion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very interesting.
Wow. Salam alaikum, Zainab.
Salam alaikum. You know,
Okay. Any other questions or comments that people want to make?
I just would like to send Drushat Shalom with Rivka to her mom. It's been a while since I've been with you all, so.
Yeah, last week, Neil, you missed the next Yo-Yo Ma.
I would have loved to have heard that. But I was in the middle of a 13-hour day last Wednesday. And
So, we're talking about the,
synagogue until 10:30 at night Central Time. So
yeah,
I'm sorry, I couldn't even take up a half hour to listen to that.
we're talking about Ushpizin. So, we think of who we would invite to the Sukkah. And I will be thinking of the spirit of Pablo Casals, who may or may not ever have played the first 20 bars of the Kol Nidre, but would probably have been put to shame by Rebecca.
Pablo Casals has a wonderful recording of the book, actually.
Yeah, okay, so there you go. So she's the next Pablo Casals.
So I will ask, Rivka, I will ask for a rain check sometime while it's still fresh in your mind. Yeah, even if we have to do it on our own time, that would be a very nice treat. But meanwhile, still say hi to Mom for me.
Okay, I'm going to remind you that this is our weekly Wednesday. Next Wednesday, those of us who are lucky enough to be in Laramie, we will be guests of Simcha. We will have Siyum HaTorah, as it's called in tradition. We will celebrate completing the reading of the Torah in the Sukkah of Simcha. I will try to come up for the day, but we'll Zoom regardless.
Okay.
And for those who are in Laramie, Simcha has invited people to a Friday night / festival meal in his sukkah, or those who can get to Laramie on Friday night. That will not be available by Zoom. Do RSVP. If you don't have the RSVP, all of you should have the letter I sent on or that Lori sent on. And there you go. In terms of other things that are going on, I'm going to try to get the Hillel kids to get something set up, but hasn't happened yet. And meanwhile, this is keeping me busy enough. The Jewish festival of Sukkot begins on Friday night, and the traditional greeting is either Chag Sameach or Moadim L'Simcha.
And of course, during the intermediate days, Chagim Usmanim L'Sasona is the response.
Right. Or Moed Tov. And there you go. I should mention that in Iran is coming Thursday, I think, is Ashura. Is Arba'in. So did they do anything for Arba'in?
not as much as they do for Ashura, but yeah, they celebrate it to some extent.
Yeah, so on the 20th day of the second Muslim month, which this year is the same as about the same as Tishrei, is Arba'in. Arba'in just means 40. It's 40 days after the 10th day of the first month. So there you go. And certainly Jewish tradition knows about 40-day periods. This is one of them. So we'll wish, I don't know what they say in Farsi, Kol Am wa Antum B'Khair. They probably say that enough, even in Tehran. And Netflix now has the American remake of an Israeli series called Tehran on Netflix, which I have to go see. And we'll see whether it's worth anything. Okay, anybody have any final comments?
Just a huge toda rabah for being my teacher and for you all enriching my life.
Well, thanks to all of you for allowing me to just do this too, and joining me, forcing me to do a little bit of Torah study. Simcha, I will be out of town for 2 Wednesdays. I'll either change the time or I'm going to ask either you, Simcha, or you, Neil, to prepare something on those Wednesdays.
Give me some
Yeah, the November 3rd, the day after Election Day, and December, I think it's the 2nd.
Okay, well, if I
I'll
have
be
it, I'll ask
going
you.
back and forth to New Orleans. My son, who's also called Simcha, my son and daughter-in-law are expecting. So we're going to be in New Orleans for a while.
If you don't mind, my middle son is possibly going to be here by December on his way to he and his wife spending a month in Florida with her parents. So I would rather do the November one if that would be okay.
Okay. So we'll see what, I think keeping it the same time is better than me either not doing it or changing the time. Okay. Anybody else have anything to talk about? Mimi, you've been sort of quiet. Is Martin doing okay? I can't hear you if you are muted.
Sorry, I did have one question that was kind of a carryover from class.
Okay.
You said you knew people who were inside the house synagogue when it was tried?
Yeah, sure.
Woohoo!
Our neighbor's kid was in Germany and went there. And one of my daughter's, I'll say friends, but it might be more like a professional contact, was active in Berlin. And the reason they were in Halle is because they had organized a kind of, I'll call it a Shabbaton or something. They had organized a deputization to spend that time in Halle. So there was a whole group of visitors who were there.
We have a Holocaust Torah that comes from a town that starts with H that was, the synagogue was destroyed on Kristallnacht. I wonder if it was Halle.
Well, what Mimi's question was had to do with a year ago. Was it a year ago?
No.
There was an attack outside the synagogue in Halle in Germany. And they had security so that they didn't get inside, but still it shook people up tremendously that it was necessary. And when we were in Berlin, the security around synagogues was beefed up. The security in the hotel wasn't, but the security in the performance locations, there was a Lewandowski festival, which was absolutely, Neil, you ought to go. You probably I don't know whether you like this stuff or not, but the chorals,
myself, of course.
Yeah, the choral singing was amazing.
Yeah, I'd love to.
And so there you go. So that was the answer to that.
I'll have to try to figure out which town our Holocaust Torah comes from.
Well, you should know that. That's an important thing. And again, that's one of the things you could remember on Sukkot.
Shabbos, Chag Sameach, I need to go.
Chag Sameach, everybody. Happy and a healthy year.
Those that are here, we'll see you Friday night, and God willing, we'll see everybody again on Wednesday. All right.
And Zainab, I'm so happy that you're joining us. It's a lot of fun.
Well, to be completely transparent in these days, when you talk about the other side or people are mentioning other things, I turn the volume off, so I don't even hear it. But other than that, thank you for the session.
The other side.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
For me.
Rabbi, thank you, Seth.